I want to welcome our speaker today. We are very lucky to have Cheryl Boucher with us. She is an occupational therapist who is a national presenter. She provides lots of professional development to teachers and schools. She herself has worked in the school setting and also more recently in the virtual school setting for many years. And so she has a wealth of information and experience for us. She is the author of I Hate to Write, which is an excellent resource if your child has any kind of handwriting issues, whether it be fine motor issues or just doesn't like to write. So I encourage you to look at that book. And then Cheryl really has a lot of expertise in the area of sensory issues. And what I appreciate most about Cheryl and what I learned from Cheryl is that she takes into consideration the whole child. So she is not just thinking about how do we get through the next 5 minutes, but she really wants to say, how can we regulate our children so that they can have a really good quality of life all day long? So with that said, Cheryl, I am looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's such an honor to be with you guys today. So thank you all for joining us for this session today on building a sensory lifestyle and sensory strategies for your child. I know this is a different time that we're all dealing with, so I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in and hopefully can leave in a short period of time with some strategies or a different way of thinking about things, at least that you weren't before. I just want to add that I have on my page here, the CherylIHateToWrite.com is an email. If you want to contact me and have a question I might be able to help with. I also have a Facebook of I Hate to Write. So like us on Facebook. My co-author, Kathy Older, who's a wonderful speech and language pathologist, and I have collaborated and tried to give good strategies on our Facebook link as well. So hope to hear from you. So I want to start out with, I think before we can talk about a sensory lifestyle, we really have to understand what is sensory processing. And so in a quick way, in a simple way of saying things as much as possible, I want you to understand what sensory processing is and what sensory processing disorder is. In other words, you have to be able to understand the foundation in order to know how to do the strategies to help to support your child. And so we know that probably about 70% of our behavior is interpreted as how we process sensory information. So 70% of my behavior is depending on how I process sensory information. That's a lot. And so when we look at all of our sensory systems, all 8 of them, it's a lot happening all at once. And so you can see on the sheet in front of you or on the screen that you're familiar with most of these senses. You learned them in grade school, but the bottom 3 may not be quite as familiar. And I just want to touch on them briefly. My vestibular sense is my sense of movement, equilibrium, balance. It gives sense to my world, what is right side up, what's upside down. It does a ton more than that, really, really vital. My proprioceptive system, that is housed between my joints that connect muscle and tendon to bone. My proprioceptors tell me where is my body in space? Where am I in relation to another object, another person? Where my limbs are in relationship to my torso? It fires off wonderful calming chemicals to my body. And it is activated with push and pull and lift and carry activities. So you're going to hear a lot more about that. And then my interoception is an 8th sense that talks about my internal sensory interpretation of what's happening. And I'll share some more information on that. And hopefully we won't run out of time and I can get to everything. So I want you to understand all of that is happening. When we look at typical sensory processing, then these receptors from all of our sensory systems are continually taking in information from our body and the environment, sending it to my brain and my nervous system, and then my brain is trying to make an accurate response. It's trying to interpret, to analyze, and then hopefully, if it gets good information and makes the right connection, I have an appropriate adaptive response to my environment. But unfortunately, what happens when there's a problem and there's sensory processing disorder, there's difficulty organizing all that sensory information. So the sensors are not really delivering accurate information to begin with, or once it gets into the system, it's just not making the right interconnections. And thought to be like a big backup on 465, a big traffic jam. No one is getting where they need to be efficiently or accurately or safely. And so what happens is that if I'm getting faulty information, I'm going to have a faulty, inappropriate, adaptive response. When we see the meltdowns, the shutdowns, the frustrations, definitely can be related to a sensory processing challenge. This in turn is affecting my attention, my focus, my motor planning, behavior, emotions, and so much more. So I would encourage you, as you think about your own child, to think about what is that behavior trying to tell us. When we see a child who may be challenged with an orthopedic challenge, I may see a wheelchair, I may see a crutch or a walker. But when I see sensory processing challenges, it looks very behaviorish. And what is that child trying to tell me, and how can I give support? You really have to play detective. And so I'm briefly going to talk about some of the under this big umbrella of the three major areas of sensory over-responsiveness, sensory defensiveness, which is sensory defensiveness and sensory sensitivities, sensory under-responsiveness, and then sensory seeking. So sensory over-responsive, if you have a child who you see is avoiding lots of things, who seems very sensitive in life, they may go into fight-flight response. It could be one of those sensory systems, it may be several. They almost exaggerate whatever is happening that doesn't fit the situation. Somebody brushed against them next to their desk at school and they go into a major meltdown. There's a little bit of a sound in the room that everybody else is tuned out and their hands are over their ears and they're on overload. So you'll hear sensory over-responsiveness, sensory defensiveness, sensory sensitivities. They may really, really have trouble in a lot of this, and the outcome of it is that they don't want to participate in social gatherings. They don't want to have fun at the family outing we thought was going to be wonderful. Going to school for the convocations. Lots and lots of things in life that they just want to avoid. And then when I look at sensory under-responsiveness, that's kind of like a lack of response or an inefficient response to the sensory stimulation that's coming in. And they just don't seem to be as aware, or it may be even a delay. These are kids that sometimes look like they're daydreaming. They look a little unmotivated. I really dislike the term lazy. I'll hear sometimes they just look kind of lazy. They just don't want to try anything. They may be your really more self-absorbed student and may not, again, be joining in as readily. And then we have the sensory seeking kids. And if you are fortunate to have one of these wonderful kids in your life, you know them almost right away. They are on the go continually. They are seeking more and more sensory input for their sensory systems to register, to reach that threshold of feeling good inside, of knowing where their bodies are in space, to feel calming, to feel organized. And they just can't seem to get enough. They jump, they climb, they bite, they stomp, they fall down on purpose, they touch everything, they sometimes are loud. Some kids love to be snuggled and held really, really tight, wrapped up, lots of deep pressure. So you can see these three profiles, and you'll see a mixture with one individual that may have an under-responsiveness in one area and an over-responsiveness or a sensory seeking in another. It's a very complicated process. So what I want to get to now that you have kind of a snapshot, and I'm sure you're thinking of things for your kiddos already that you have noticed, is that how am I going to help my kids? How am I going to support my child or my student in my case? I'm going to really recommend that I'm going to use these big dogs of the most powerful sensory systems that I have. And those big dogs are my tactile system, my sense of touch, my vestibular system. Remember, we talked that being activated with movement, and that proprioceptive system that I said was activated when you do push and pull and lift and carry activities. It sounds complicated. It's really not, so hang with me. I went one other way. I want to explain it to make sure that you get the idea is that you could think of a sensory meal. And when you think about a sensory meal, don't think just food. I want you to think about the big dogs on that meal, the big meals, the big parts of the meal are going to be 3 big meals today of, on that plate, of vestibular, tactile, and proprioceptive activities. I hope that makes sense. Those are the big meal parts, okay? That's the big food. The little snacks, the little things sensory-wise are going to be some things that are like turning off a light when everybody calms down, giving a chewy snack, and that is a food in that instance, but it only lasts as long as the food is provided. trying to have maybe a candle that smells good, and the scent is very calming and organizing as long as the candle is lit. I blow out the candle and that stimulus is gone. So there's lots of little sensory tools and activities we put in that I call sensory snacks. But the big meals, the big activities are these tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive activities that we're going to talk about more. And those things stay in my nervous system for an hour and a half to 2 hours. They have an impact on my other sensory systems. They are the major contributors to helping with sensory regulation. So they're vital. So I can't say enough of if you get nothing more out of this session, but to remember that part. And so now if I look at what is a sensory lifestyle and how can I help support my student and my child with all of these great sensory strategies that we can use, and what does that look like? So a sensory lifestyle is specific activities that provide sensory input to meet that individual's sensory needs. They're embedded through everything we do throughout the day, and it continues across environments. So you think about for yourself what your day looks like, and we all subtly do things that meet our own sensory needs. Whether you take a break, get a drink of water, move away from the table, turn everything off, take a deep breath. Whatever that looks like for you, we continually have our hills and valleys throughout the day that as adults, we make socially appropriate choices. And our kids, they just do what feels good. They just do what they know. And they need sometimes the support of being taught what is more meaningful and what's more socially appropriate and what's more bang for the buck, okay? So if I have a really good sensory lifestyle in place, it's going to help with my sensory regulation, my emotional regulation, that behavioral regulation. It's going to help with my attention, my focus, my learning, my internal organization. It's going to then in turn help me to be a better social friend, a social player, a social ability to learn new skills. When I'm in sensory overload, I can't even work on those social skills you want me to learn. So down there at the bottom, that big pyramid is all of this good sensory stuff that has to be met before I can be at the top of the pyramid to be the best at whatever I want my child to be. And then I always want the students to be able to work on their own self-regulation, that they start to learn what works for me, what doesn't work for me, and to work together on what the problem is and what the plan is. And so that now looking at the activities that we can do, we talked about deep pressure, which is my sense of touch. That deep pressure touch is calming and organizing to my brain and body and nervous system. It makes a tremendous difference. So I want to be able to provide that to my students who need that. I want to make sure I've got that structured movement, and I want that big muscle activity with push, pull, lift, and carry. In other words, I want to be able to alert and calm and organize my students. The thing at the bottom that you're seeing with the sensory backpack, remember how I said the big meals, the big sensory meals were these areas we've just talked about? And then we said there's some little snacks, some little tools that are also really important and valuable. And in that sensory backpack, I might have things like headphones, a chewy snack, the appropriate fidget, a nice soft blanket, a bottle of water. It could be some calming music through an iPod. It could be visuals, sunglasses, cap, those things I need when I'm outside. I might have an emotions chart or a calming choice chart. Each child's sensory lifestyle is going to be different, and each backpack will look different. That backpack may not really be a backpack. You might choose instead to have perhaps a basket if you're at home, or it could be a little box, whatever works, a favorite, something the child likes to hold or carry. But you'll have the things that are meaningful for your child, the things that they can use on a day-to-day basis across environments, and that they help you to fill that sensory backpack. Okay. I want to talk as we look at from going to bed at night through the whole next day of how you're going to embed sensory activities throughout the day that are integrated to help support that lifestyle. But first we have to have sound sleep. And the number one thing I would hope you will take away from this is to please, please remove all electronics at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before bedtime. And I know that's really tough for many of our kids to turn those things off. However, if you can do so, it is incredibly The research is just phenomenal on how it is really depleting the melatonin that is building up in your system to help you to get ready to sleep and to fall asleep. Many of our kids on the autism spectrum are really sleep challenged to begin with. And this is just one more area. It also rewires your brain when you're on electronics to be back in a think mode, a talk mode, a work mode. So we really want to get rid of those. Getting that deep pressure touch that I talked about, having a big body pillow in the bed with your child, perhaps being inside a sleeping bag. Even a sleeping bag with a body pillow may be appropriate for deep pressure calming to their nervous system. Having calming music on. Giving a massage and lotion before bedtime if it's feasible. For an older student, they might use an UFA sponge or a scrunchie in the shower and give themselves some deep pressure before they get ready for that sleep. Water, a snack at the bedside. Many times the kids wake up at night and they would have something there with them that may be more quick and get them back to sleep quicker as well. So moving on, our time will go quickly, so I'm going to keep moving here. Our sensory strategies, when we look at sensory sensitivity, that I want to be, again, proactive. I want that big muscle movement and lots of purposeful exercise and activity, but I also want to provide that deep pressure touch. So whether I'm letting a child roll up in a blanket with their head stuck out of the blanket, of course, unroll out of the blanket, re-roll several times, they're getting deep pressure touch to their nervous system. It can calm that sensory system that is being over defensive and or sensitive. Looking at seating options, whether your family is doing a family game night, watching a movie together, doing an academic, look at what kind of positioning that your child is in for the optimal level of arousal and yet comfort and to be on the activity that you would like for them to focus on. So a beanbag chair provides deep pressure around the child and gives a lot of good pressure and calming. If it's wedged particularly in a corner or against a bookshelf, something sturdy and stable, that can really wedge around the child and give some extra support. I've used them with older students as well. Looking at a calming corner, perhaps it's got blankets, it has some pillows, their favorite reading activities that they like to do, some fidgets, things of that nature. Anything that is comforting and supportive to that student's needs, but trying to look at what kind of positioning they need and what kind of breaks they may also need. I also just briefly want to mention there are a ton of fidgets out on the market. A fidget to help to squeeze and to hold and provide deep pressure can be calming and very organizing. One fidget may be a visual distractor. I might use a visual distracting fidget if I'm standing in line at the grocery store. However, I don't want that same fidget when I'm supposed to be attending and focused on my teacher's face for learning and or virtual learning on a computer screen. So whatever your learning environment looks like right now, consider what kinds of fidgets and what can be practiced prior to actually using them in the environment you want to use them at. And then looking some more on those sensitivity strategies of trying to expose your child to tactile activities and tactile play. If there's someone who doesn't want to participate, I want to respect that space. I want to expose them to opportunities and find accommodation ways to let them be part of the experience, but it should be a positive activity and a positive experience. And if they just want to watch, that's okay. I want to talk to my child about what is the problem, where do they see their frustrations, their fears, their anxieties, and if they can share that with you, to come up together with solutions to the problems. We're wonderful at providing lots and lots of expertise as professionals and as parents, but we frequently forget to include the most important player, and that's your child, directly, and let's ask questions of them. So, and then looking at trying to adapt that environment to meet your child's needs. I don't want to make the child fit into the environment. I want the environment to fit for the child. And then I just threw in also, we have lots of issues with clothing, and what fits snug might feel good to one student because they want deep pressure, and another student may want soft, really loose fitting clothing. So really getting to know your child and considering there's a reason why they can't stand their socks on, or there's a reason that this piece of clothing that you think is fine feels horrible to them. And also to remember, do not touch and reach from behind if you have a child who has some sensory sensitivities. Come around in front, make sure that they have you have their attention, and then address them. And then I just threw in here as well, I know you've had some other workshops and Zoom meetings hearing about calming areas, a cozy corner. a safe place, whatever you want to call it. But at home, identify something that is proactively set up with you and your child working together, that you're able to decide what's going to be in that area, what it's going to look like, what their needs are, and proactively practice going to that safe place when they're not in crisis, when they're not upset. Make sure to use the use of visuals, which are an evidence-based practice for autism, and have things like the deep breathing and calming down and a sequence of steps that can help them to de-escalate and to come back to feeling that just right, that self-regulation feeling, and they'll start to identify when they're ready to go back to the activity and to be able to join again. I also include on here as one of your resources has School Moves resource, and I just wanted to show you quickly that this is a I can calm myself resource, and I really love this because we always have our body with us, so it's great that I can just use my hands and arms to help to calm and self-regulate myself. So it shows doing some little deep pressures in the hand, doing some squeezies, giving myself deep pressure, and then there's several little brain gym exercises as well. And so you'll have access to that in your resource guide. Okay. And then I also want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what belly breathing is. And it's really diaphragmatic breathing, because our diaphragm is the big muscle that really is the major muscle with breathing. So I want to teach children to have one hand on their belly and one hand on their chest. And that belly hand is going to feel that belly get really big when I take a big breath in. I'm going to count slowly to 4, and then I'm going to exhale through my mouth on a slow count of 4. So I'm breathing in through my nose, blowing out through my lips. Younger children can lay on the ground and put a nice little stuffed animal on their belly and see if they can get that stuffed animal to raise up and down as they're taking their deep breaths. Belly breathing is incredibly powerful. When I am thinking about my breathing, I'm being very mindful. I've let everything else go. My brain and nervous system can begin to calm and to be able to refocus and to be able to think and let higher level skills and learning happen again. So please, please, please take some time for that belly breathing. Breathe in the blue skies, blow out the gray. So also on those calming strategies to keep in mind that your children should know at home, we can all benefit from this. So if you do things as a family and just do a couple yoga positions, just sit and listen, be still and quiet. And what sounds do we hear? Being able to practice the deep breathing together, being able to demonstrate even to have some fun for some slow rocking or rolling. All of these things are going to help to calm the brain and nervous system. And I certainly know as an adult, I use them regularly. And then again, my child always has his hands with him so he can learn proactively at school and or virtual school or anywhere he's at to stop for just a few moments. I can rub my hands together and press them together really hard. I can rub my hands on my legs. I can open and close my fingers and repeat 10 times. Perform some seat push-ups, which sound kind of funny, but you push down through the seat of your chair with your hands and upper body while you raise your torso, legs, and feet off the ground. It's hard for an adult to do, but our kids can do it. Very calming, very organizing, and follow that with some deep breathing. Your student can proactively decide whenever they need a short break, they can learn to do this on their own. And the use of visuals with this is also really powerful. And then I've included a couple of brain gym exercises. I wanted just to point out, brain gym is really wonderful, and the increase of brain flowing to the brain, getting both sides of the brain activated together. It helps academics and focus and calming. So one quick one is a hookup. And you can see on the next page, the hookup is just like the little girls in the picture. They're just crossing the midline of their body. Their hands and fingers are crossed and intertwined. They are taking some deep breaths. It's very calming, very organizing. And just repeating that 5 or 6 times can really, really make a difference. I love cross crawl as another brain gym exercise where you're just marching. And as you march, you're alternating, touching your elbow to the opposite knee, just back and forth. And I would repeat that 10 to 20 times. Again, this is a nice, quick little break. During those times during school, you may find some frustrations, particularly if you're doing virtual schooling. And then those visual supports we talked about, having that because when I am in crisis, I can't activate the higher levels of my brain, even if I do know have some skills. Everything goes into fight flight. So by adding that visual support, it's going to make a huge difference for your student to be able to give a look and be able to visually just follow a sequence of steps and not have to feel more frustrated and not knowing what to do. I wanted to mention the use of masks, since we were talking about sensory sensitivities here. This is from the National Autism Association. So if you are struggling with your particular student or child and trying to decide how to wear a mask, when to wear a mask, what mask to wear, here's just some strategies. Demonstrating it on a stuffed animal, a favorite object, another family member, modeling it in the mirror, having some fun with it. Allowing your child to choose different fabrics. We know that for some of us, one thing may feel itchy and uncomfortable, and another fabric feels nice and soft and is bearable. Practicing at times when it's not a stressful time, when you're doing a fun activity for short periods, can be very helpful. And then also, if you're going for any kind of outing, something that is not stressful to your child, and having it on for a very short period so they can start to get more familiar with it and get used to it. I would certainly, on the last strategy, you know your child and what is safe and what is appropriate for them. The use of a piece of chewing gum, sugarless gum, or a little piece of peppermint, something that they can suck on, may be appropriate for your child if they are bothered by the smell of their own breath while wearing the mask. Again, I would not recommend that for just carte blanche for all kids. Many kids I would not recommend that for, but you know your child, and if it's someone who may be able to manage that safely, then that will be up to you, of course. And then also I saw a strategy that talked about using just a drop of essential oil on the outside of the mask, just to give it a more pleasant scent if your child can tolerate that. Okay. Then I quickly want to go through talking about evidence-based practices. And the evidence-based practice for exercise is awesome, because it helps to support the strategies that I've already been talking about, a big muscle movement and structured movement. So when we talk about evidence-based practice of exercise for individuals on the autism spectrum, they did 20 minutes in the morning, they did 20 minutes at night time, and what they found, I shouldn't say at night, but in the afternoon, after lunchtime, so 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, and then they filled in about 1 minute every hour of a little activity. And what they found was that when they used things like pulling on a scooter board, jumping on a mini tramp, jogging in place, doing stretching, using little hand weights, doing yoga, all of these things done consistently, that negative behaviors went down to 0 or near 0, and all positive behaviors went up, which is amazing. So that's just awesome. So, so important. And then also the research is out on aerobic exercise for all of us. Getting our heart to target heart rate is going to help improve all of these wonderful things. Dr. John Rady, who is a specialist in this area, refers to aerobic exercise like miracle grow for the brain. That's how powerful it is. So I encourage you again and again to keep all of these thoughts in mind of how your day with your child looks, and how as a family even we can increase what we're providing. When we look at vestibular, remember we said it's activated with movement. And so it goes along with all of this exercise and movement, that I'm looking at things like walking, dancing, running, swimming, swinging, bike riding, rocking, rolling. You can think of 10 more ways that we are moving, and that has an impact on my vestibular system. So some things that may be alerting to one child may be calming to another child. So it really depends on their sensory systems. This is a site I included that is called Move to Learn. That I will say no more for that for sake of time, but check it out. It's a great site for 5 minutes of exercise. He brings you up and he brings you back down. And I love Coach Calhoun. And then looking at those proprioceptive types of activities of push and pull and lift and carry that are going to be in this sensory lifestyle throughout the day. Think about wall push-ups. Think about those seat push-ups. Any chores that you have for your child to do at home. It could be carrying laundry, carrying the bag of groceries in, wiping off counters, vacuuming, raking leaves, shoveling snow, digging, whatever it is. All of those things have a huge impact on our proprioceptive system and fire off those proprioceptors. Those are the activities that you want. So look at how can you embed those throughout your child's day. And these are some more things for little ones that are just lots of little things from crawling and crab walking and pretending to be animals on the floor, having fun tug-of-war activities, anything of pushing a little grocery cart with items in, and lots of things that your child is probably doing. They're wonderful. And then I want to make sure to mention that positioning component on looking at tummy time. Our younger kids, when they're on the floor, it's calming to their nervous system to lie on the floor. Weight bearing through my shoulders and my elbows helps to strengthen my upper body, which helps lots of things. And then looking at that position, whether you again are having family game night or an academic time, if your child is not comfortable and they do not have had first that big muscle, heavy work activity and structured movement before they come over to join you, they may not be ready. If you've had that and then they're ready now to sit down or to stand, but if they're sitting, to again get that big beanbag chair out if it's appropriate for them. If you're trying to do something at a computer screen and you want to be able to do keyboarding, I would really suggest making sure that that chair, that child is able to touch their feet to the ground, and ergonomically that desk, chair, and computer is positioned for comfort and access to those tools. Otherwise, they will be struggling and frustrated during their lessons. And then looking at visual strategies, we also see that we want to make sure that we're providing the location. Remember that environment. So no matter what my student's going to be doing, did I set them up for success? Take a look at what is visually distracting around them. What is the lighting in your room? Making sure that maybe you're using natural lighting, table lamps, floor lamps. Get away from any overhead harsher lights. And then trying to look out for having less information on a page. If you're there trying to do any directions or any type of academic, it can be very, very powerful to be able to set that piece up, and you'll find an increase in independence that you didn't see before. They become more dependent on some learned helplessness, if you will, when the environment has not been set up to have them to be successful. And then some other visual strategies, looking at trying to, again, that less is more. Our kids shut down when there's too much on a page. Cutting worksheets into strips. Covering if there's too much of reading on a page with an index card or construction paper. Highlighting what is most important on the page. If there's a written response, just doing a yellow highlighted line where there's expected this written response over the black line. Just makes it pop more visually. Trying to highlight those important pieces of instruction. Trying to help those visual processing challenges to be more efficient. And then looking at the use of technology. We have a ton of technology out on the market, and there's some wonderful tools available. However, if your child is on a keyboard, make sure that they are spending time on learning keyboarding lessons. If they don't, it will not be nearly as successful, and shows it can slow down the process. Many of our kids truly hate to write. And because of the language, the organization, the sensory and the motor components, we understand why. It is multi-layered. And so I need to try to find different avenues at times, and technology can be a great resource. But also want to make sure, again, that all these sensory needs are met before putting them in front of that computer. And I think I am going over my time. And Amy, do we need to stop now? I think I've gone over quite a bit here.
I think you can take another minute or two, Cheryl.
Okay, I'm going to finish up kind of quick here. I apologize. I have lots to share. These are just showing you if your child is working on a worksheet, I will put a green dot on the left side of the paper and a right dot on the right, or a green line and a red line to show where to start and where to stop, because visually scanning, our children sometimes don't look at the whole picture. So it gives a nice visual cue. There are also commercial paper available on the market. Some can be copied and downloaded for free, and these have like a yellow highlight to show where to place those letters and words. And then there's lots and lots of auditory strategies that you can use. The biggest thing I think we need to be aware of is, again, doing that big muscle and movement activities before I set my child up into an area and expect them to be focused on the task. Along with that auditory piece of just trying to look at tuning out as much as is in the environment as possible. Ask your child, is it quiet in here for their ears? What do we need to change? You know, offering that tone of voice that is understanding, providing those personal cues. Please try not to yell from across a room. And then looking at that little sensory snack, like a set of headphones or earbuds, that can be really powerful and helpful for a student in that setting. Trying to use direct sentences and try not to immediately repeat yourself. If you are backing up with the use of visuals and you've given the instruction plain and simple, allow time to process. And then pre-warn of extra noises. I know in our area on Fridays at 11 o'clock, the safety alarm goes off really, really loud in our area. And I always want to forewarn someone that's with me, it's going to get really, really loud here. In your home, it might be the blender, the vacuum cleaner, whatever. And then just briefly want to mention to you about oral sensory strategies for those kiddos that are having challenges with everything is in their mouth. Again, remember big muscle, large muscle movement, heavy work, structured movement activities that we've talked about. And then follow that they may still need a chewy snack, like something healthy, carrots, raisins, apples, that type of proactive little strategy that is given before they start chewing on their shirt or something that they shouldn't have in their mouth. Providing an electric stimulation of an electric toothbrush can be really helpful. An electric toothbrush has a lot of vibration and can really wake up and desynthesize that oral cavity, give some calming and organization. So I would really recommend using an electric toothbrush 2 or 3 times a day. And then activities like blowing bubbles are just calming and organizing. I want you to also be aware of some of the feeding strategies that can be very, very helpful. I would consult an OT or an SLP. We know that eating is a very positive experience, and many of our children really, really struggle with being beyond just being a picky eater. And so trying to be sure that your kiddos are exposed to food at least 20 times to a certain kind of food. So it might be that they can smell it, they can see others eating it, they are able to help prepare it, whatever that looks like in your family, but to be at least exposed. And then there are foods that they do like, so how could you branch off from what they do like to something kind of similar? So if they like, for instance, yogurt, maybe they would like pudding. So kind of go in that direction. And then, as I say, to consult a specialist if you're really, really struggling. And then I'm just going to close with trying to tell you on the smells and sensitivities, we need to be aware of what we're using and what we think smells good and what may be aversive to someone at home and in our family. And then trying to offer our kids who really want to smell things that are inappropriate sometimes and they seek out strong smells, being able to offer things like scratch and sniff stickers, a scented marker. There's certain candles that have nice eucalyptus, lavender, peppermint that your student may enjoy smelling. Essential oils of vanilla and lavender are very calming, where orange, lemon, and peppermint can be really alerting. So having even just a little scent of a cologne or something if they're seeking on the wrist for them to smell. We've had some children who were looking at things that were smelling, they wanted to smell things that were not socially appropriate. And so how to give a replacement behavior for that. I don't want them smelling this inappropriate smell that they're seeking, so I need to find something less invasive that can help to meet that need. So it might be something like, we had one child in particular, we used a little tiny piece of cheese and put it into a little tiny container, and he was able to smell this cheese, which sounds horrible, but to him it just smelled good while we were working on the bigger sensory needs. So, and it worked for him. So I'm not saying each child needs a piece of cheese by any means, but just as an example. And then I just want to close with trying to talk about on your older kids who may be struggling with their sense of smell is under-responsive. So think about having stronger smells for shampoos, cream rinses, toothpaste, mouthwash, something that registers to them that they might enjoy wanting to use, and to use a social narrative and story explaining why it's important to use good hygiene, even though they aren't bothered by their own body odor and smell, and what that looks like to others in a social situation and why it's important. And then the last area of interoception is our area of internally how we perceive information from our internal organs from a sensory perspective. So it's our heartbeat, our pain, our breathing, feeling hungry, anxious, bladder, bowel, sexual arousal, all of that emotional areas as well. And so I want you just to be aware of that, because when you have kids that sometimes are late on potty training, they may not register that their bladder is full. They're not getting accurate information until it's too late. You may have a child who doesn't realize that they were stung by a bee on the inside of their arm because they didn't feel it and have a big welt. You could have a child who is truly saying, I'm hungry, 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 but they're not registering fullness, or they misinterpret the information and they are not as hungry as it was a problem gastrointestinally, and they have a stomachache. So it can be a lot of misinterpretation of those internal sensory signals, and we need to help support that as well. So we might try some mindfulness, we might try deep breathing, social narratives, talking with your child about how they are feeling, how you are feeling. So if you're experiencing something together, like, whoa, my heart was beating really fast when we were running, or wow, that water was so cold when we jumped into the pool. How did you feel when you went down the slide? Really, really talking about that, those emotions and those feelings, and being aware and mindful can really help and make a difference. I gave you a resource also of a specialist who has done a lot of research in this area, and you'll see that in your resources as well. In closing, thank you for hanging with me. I just want to remind you, I know this is a lot of information, but I hope you've got your wheels turning now. And remember, sensory is proactive. It's across the environments. Involve your child in your planning. Remember deep pressure, tactile touch, that good structured movement, and big muscle activities. And remember to breathe, and then celebrate every positive thing that your child does. And just have a party over just anything at all that just seems very small, but it's really a big deal. And we want those behaviors repeated. They will be so thrilled. So thank you. I know you're wonderful parents because you're here with me today. So I will close now, Amy, and give it back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's just a ton of information. I'm already taking notes of things I want to try with my daughter. We do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, what are some strategies when my child wakes up in the middle of the night? So I know lots of kids tend to get in that routine of they sleep for a little bit and then they're up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. What would you recommend?
I would go back to that sleep routine before they go to bed. Make sure, again, those electronics have been turned off way before bedtime. Make sure that you've done the deep pressure touch, whatever that looks like, whether it's massage, whether it's deep rolling, whether it was a good warm bath, whatever that looks like for you. So you've set them up for success before they get into bed. And then make sure, as we talked about, that sleeping bag, that body pillow. The hope is that we're proactively providing those things, and that's going to decrease the likelihood of that child waking up. As I say, if they do wake up still for whatever reason, I would also make sure that you've got some strategies that you've practiced when they're calm and awake. Like maybe they put their iPod back on with headphones and some soft calming music. Maybe that little snack is next to the bed. Something that helps to keep them in bed whenever possible and still getting that deep pressure touch and that calming. I hope that makes sense. Let me know about going into another whole workshop.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me, but I do know that is a common thing that a lot of families have to deal with. Another question was, I have a child that sometimes likes deep pressure and sometimes does not want to be touched at all. How would you approach this?
If it's possible, I would sure ask my child, or visually show them, do you want a big hug? Do you want to roll up in the blanket and be my burrito? Ask your child. That's why I said we really need to include our kids in the conversation. And again, I think we as professionals, we do a really good job of that. But there are times that we just have analyzed everything and we just know all the answers. And sometimes we really need to go back and ask the key player. So if it's a time when they want a hug, they want deep pressure, let them let you know. And if it's not a time, there's so many different ways you could do this. You could have a little visual of something that they use or they point to, or they just say no to if they don't have communication ability as readily as another child. So not knowing all the information on the student, I would first ask them.
Great, and I think, too, that goes back to remembering we need to teach our kids to advocate for their needs and their their sensory needs and let people know, I don't feel like doing this right now, or I would really like to have this. This could really help.
Right. And I tell you, I was reminded of a quick story of a little boy one time that when I was in the kindergarten classroom, and I could just tell him he was so struggling. He could not sit still in front of even a computer screen. And I just very gently but firmly, I let him know I was there first. And then I held my hands up to show him he was familiar. And I just gave him deep pressure touch through his shoulders. For this little boy, I stayed for just a minute or two. I knew him. I knew that he needed this, and he knew me. As I gave him the deep pressure touch for just a minute or two, and just kind of gave him a little side shoulder on top of his shoulders of pressure, when I moved away from him and stood aside, one, he was more calm, but two, he looked up at me and then he wanted more. And so we went back. So you'll find a way to make that connection and let your child appropriately be able to voice what they need. As I said, when they start to become their own advocate, that's the beauty of everything. They start to make better choices. You might say, I can't do this. It's not socially appropriate, but I can do this or this. Which do you choose? And working together, because that can make a huge difference. If we keep the control, change doesn't really happen as readily. Some of our kids need more supports than others, but we want to be able to help bring them into the decision making too.
All right, well, I think we have one more question. If anybody else has any other questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box now. But I'll go ahead and ask this last one that I have. You talked about the big dogs, the big meals. And how long is the benefit of those big meals or those sensory meals? How many hours do they last, or how often should we do that? And then how often should we give a snack to our kids?
And when you look at a sensory lifestyle, and I'm going to say it again, each of us are individual, our needs are all different, and each of your children are each unique individuals. First, have that conversation with your child. You're playing detective, you're looking at these behaviors. What are they telling me? Be proactive, not reactive when all of a sudden he's like off the wall, so to speak, and you just are really working hard. I know he's probably going to need some extra movement, so I'm going to proactively provide that. Those big dogs, that deep pressure touch, that structured movement, and that big muscle, big heavy work activity can stay in my nervous system for an hour and a half to 2 hours. How frequently I'm going to be giving that is going to depend on my child, but I would be looking at least 3 to 4 times a day. And in real world school, sensory strategies are used all the time and embedded in classrooms. Occupational therapists are talking all the time with your teachers and to provide those supports. When you're at home, and if you're doing virtual school, it's going to look a little bit different. So again, you have to be thinking proactively, setting that up and say, oh gosh, we had a really good break this morning. He should be good for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then in between, I'm still going to give those little sensory snacks. So I'm still going to make sure I've got that fidget that he can hold while he's listening to the teacher on virtual school time. I'm going to make sure perhaps I have an actual crunchy snack that he might be able to crunch on while he's listening. I'm going to make sure that I've had those headphones that are in my sensory backpack handy when he needs them to tune everybody out while he's trying to do his homework. So sensory snacks, the little things, they're used very much so ongoing, very much so ongoing. And again, it will depend on your kiddo. I had that conversation. Did that help, Amy? Does that make sense to you too?
Yes, thank you so much, Cheryl. And thank you for all of the information that you have provided today for us. Appreciate everyone who joined us today. If you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to those of us at Indiana Resource Center for Autism. Email us, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk with you about your child and your needs. And then I know Cheryl will be she shared her information as well. So we hope that we will have lots of opportunities or lots of ways that you can get support because we are all here for you. So
thank you so much for having me today. And I know it was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I just really wanted to get your wheels turning and you'll start to think of more ideas, more ways you can support your child just by getting some little tips along the way. So hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for hanging with me and going over a little bit on our time too. So thank you so much. I hope you guys are all staying safe and having a great day.
Thanks, Cheryl, and I have a great day, everyone.